Darkness swallow my sight. Endless miles are within sight. Engines screaming, souls collide. Lost on this nightmare ride. Concrete serpents turning cold. Ravel secrets, tales untold. Highway ghosts, they haunt the lane. Echoes of my fear and pain. Concrete serpents looking cold. Ravel secrets, tales untold. Highway ghosts, they haunt the lane. Echoes of my fear and pain.
That we have been kind of working on across the United States. And you have a doozy for us, I think, today, McKenna.
Yes, absolutely. It's honestly, it's really sad kind of how this particular funeral home like ended up the way that it does. So it's the Thomas and Sons, or Thomas Shepard and Sons Funeral Directors is the name of the company. They organize funerals. They, have a cemetery, and then they also like perform cremations, or they did. They're located in Henderson, North Carolina, or Hendersonville, North Carolina. But they do have like a very like innocent history. It's very interesting because it was initially started in like 1903, by the first Thomas Shepard. He had like a passion and an affinity for funeral services and making sure people's loved ones were taken care of. So it's a very, very long-standing business, and it only recently closed down.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So essentially, there's a ton of money missing from this cemetery. Lots of family members have been swindled by this business. So yeah, about $206,000 is just gone missing out of thin air. And that's just one of like the many complaints that family members have had about this company.
Oh no.
And I know, like the state, there's a state board of like funeral directors. They've done investigations. They've hired a forensic auditor to kind of go through finances and all of the records. And this happened roughly 4 years ago, kind of when this whole court proceeding was happening. The cemetery board in North Carolina filed like a contempt motion against the Shepherd Memorial Park, which is like their cemetery. So there was a hearing on like November 10th, and that I believe was in 2021 in Raleigh, North Carolina. The funeral director, who was also a Thomas Shepard, so his namesake was like the founder over 100 years ago, he had his funeral director's license revoked. And it was his wife actually that was like she ran the crematory, and her license was also revoked. And and so there was a lot of like red flags. People had reported them for shady behavior for a while, and that's why this licensure was revoked. And at first it was revoked on like a temporary measure, but like a probationary period essentially. But later on it was permanently revoked once they had done a more thorough investigations of like the goings on.
Do you have any idea like how long between complaints and revocation? Do you have any idea?
Oh gosh. So like the hearing itself and like the sentencing happened in like November of 2021. But there were complaints that they'd started their investigation like June, like the year prior. It doesn't state how long they had been coming in though.
Okay.
It just state some specifics about like the family's particular complaints, and like, but it doesn't say specifically how long there had been complaints. But you know, when it's
Okay.
kind of like a smaller town, I feel like generally a lot of stuff people feel like they can get away with a lot more stuff kind of can get brushed under the rug. They take advantage of like people's ignorance, in the fact that, you know, especially if you've never had to like bury a loved one, they don't know the processes, you know. It
Sure.
kind of made me very aware of the fact that, you know, if one of my family members passes away and I'm responsible for taking care of everything, I don't know what I need to do. So that's it's on my list of to-dos to research that just so I'm prepared. But
Yeah.
yeah. Do you have any questions?
Well, no, I mean, you can like pay for your cremation or your funeral years and years and
Hmm.
years in advance. But that being said, if somebody like this is doing shady stuff, you've paid for it.
Yes.
If somebody's paid for it, then you go and then that loved one dies, and then
Hmm.
the money's gone, and they're like, We don't have any records of that or
Yes.
whatever."
So interestingly enough that you like brought that up, there was a specific case actually. Um, let's see if I have it marked here. But essentially, they had done a like where they had paid for the services. The mother had actually gone in, that had passed away, had gone in and paid for the services, and it was adjusted for inflation. So that way, the family wouldn't have to take care of like her funeral expenses.
Hmm.
And essentially, what happened after this funeral home had already been paid, the mother passed away, you know, a few years later. Uh, they had they kept no record of it. They took the payment and kept absolutely zero record. And then they didn't like calculate it correctly, and they ended up like charging the family like more than what it was supposed to be, more than this woman had already paid, so her family didn't have to have the financial burden of paying for her burial.
Oh,
It's very
yeah.
unfortunate.
Yep.
um, so, so there's also like many, like I'm not sure how the regulations go like state to state. Like you probably would know more about the specific like state regulations for different like requirements for filing for a death certificate and like reporting things to the state. But this company, they were very neglectful in all of that. There was multiple cases. One was May 11th of 2020. So that was just before they had started like their main investigation into like the company, the funeral home. It was Martha Walker filed a complaint that an unlicensed employee named Timothy met with the family of the decedent, who was named Mary Beck, to provide information about a funeral service and the cost. So the person they met with was completely unlicensed and also took payment. And so they got in trouble for that. That was just one of many things they got in trouble for. Um, and then the family decided later on to move Mary's remains to a different funeral home. Uh, and the man's wife, Thomas's wife, took the death certificate that they had received from the state and ripped it up in front of them so that the other funeral home didn't have the convenience of just having it. They had to go through the whole process all over again.
What?
Uh, yes. Yep. And then
Wow.
she's actually quoted. She's quoted here with like she was interviewed. You know, she made statements in court. She is quoted saying this about like their patrons or customers. They don't like me because I'm outspoken and I call them on things. So
What?
just a very arrogant person. Yeah, I know, and definitely not the kind of person that you would want handling like your family members' remains.
Everybody that I've ever met in this line of work are some of the most compassionate people I've ever been around.
Yeah.
With and it this is mind blowing because this, yeah, exactly. This is not the kind of person you want representing your family.
Right. Right. And I mean, like these kind of people, these like volatile people exist like everywhere, but like it's so sad because they do exist in like environments like this, in funeral homes, in sensitive situations. They're in the medical field. They have absolutely no empathy for the people around them and the care that they should have. So that's a whole other problem, that I feel like people could become more self-aware. But it's really unfortunate that this happens so consistently with so many families.
Yeah.
So there was an investigation, essentially, a very large investigation. So this inspection, it started in June 2020. There were statements made. The investigator's name was, I'm probably going to butcher this, Stoessner, Stoessner. So he had found that an employee held an expired funeral service license, and was also engaged in the practice of funeral services after his license had expired. So that's the second expired or non-licensed, where they were essentially practicing the services that they absolutely should not have been. So they also, how like funeral homes can charge like the insurance, like a life insurance, will pay them directly, and any excess of the cost needs to be returned back to the family. There's also multiple instances where they were paid by the insurance companies and then any excess disappeared, essentially. So they were committing insurance fraud, financial fraud. And it's shocking to me, honestly, that they don't have more severe punishments than what does happen to them, because they essentially get away with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see. So a pre-need, and that's it's like the PRENEED. So pre-need is like, at least in North Carolina, kind of what they would file, or a family member would file and pay for their funeral services in advance. So a pre-need.
Okay.
And you have to have a specific license to do that. They did have the license, apparently, but it wasn't correctly displayed. So that was a smaller infraction that their auditor pointed out to them. They also found that the facility itself was in a complete state of disrepair. There was corrosion. Let's see. So their certification from the laboratory hadn't been maintained at all. So they weren't maintaining any like cleanliness standards. It was dirty. It was falling apart. I know. And then he found that 2 unlicensed Shepherd employees who were not qualified as crematory technicians had performed cremations at least 7 times in the year of 2020.
Wow. Okay.
Right. And I mean, that's large equipment, it's dangerous. Like, I mean,
Well,
anyone can learn anything, but there's a process.
There's a process, and there's a process for a reason. There's a
Absolutely.
You're burning at about 1800 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
And there's a process for how you then remove the ashes and document all of that. I mean, there's a process for this for a reason. And yeah, so I've talked about this in the last 2 episodes that we did on the funeral homes, that I used to inspect funeral homes and crematoriums. So
yes,
more for the air quality compliance for the stacks and things, environmental regulations, right? But there's a process for a reason, because it's a human body. And you're dealing with, like you said, very, very, this equipment will kill you. So you have to be licensed, and there's a reason why you have to be licensed. There's OSHA requirements and everything else that comes in play. And you can't just have an employee do this stuff. They have to be licensed.
Absolutely. Because if like something happens, if there is some sort of disaster, then, whoever's liable, it makes liability a whole other issue. But also, you've got other people that are injured or passed away. You've got this building with people's loved ones that's potentially burned to the ground. So you said you kind of did like what's the word that you used?
Inspections.
Audits, inspections.
Yeah.
Perfect. And so, like, did you do them like just kind of randomly? You would get assigned like a random crematorium, random funeral home, or were you assigned them kind of based on like a report basis? Like someone was like, "Hey, you should probably check this place out," or both.
Yeah, that probably no. If they had an air quality permit, then I had about 900 air quality permits a year for various industries, and I had to inspect all of them. So,
Wow.
but they were I walked in unannounced every time,
Mm-hmm.
and I would
Yeah.
ask for, if it was 18 months since I was there, then I would ask for 18 months of records. And sometimes I found in one instance, I found one crematorium was processing a whole lot of bodies, and I thought that's kind of interesting because I know how long it
Mm-hmm.
takes.
Right.
And when I started going through the records, I noticed, wow, they have one crematorium, and how many bodies did they process this month? I just thought that's interesting.
Oh.
So then I called in another inspector, the
Mm-hmm.
licensing inspector for the crematorium, not the environmental side, but more the human kind. And yeah,
Right.
they found that they had processed more than one body at a time. So they were still
Oh my
mixing
gosh.
bodies and ashes. Um,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
but so I found the issue, but it wasn't under my permit
Right.
to.
It wasn't like
I,
your responsibility to investigate it. It was your
yeah,
like responsibility to see that there was an issue and report it to someone that
right.
would investigate.
I did
Okay.
take copies of those records, and they didn't know why. I just said I needed them for my report, so they gave them to me.
Hmm.
And then when I got back to the office, I made the phone calls, and but typically every other place, and I probably inspected I want I can't remember exactly, but it was around 8 to 10 a year.
Okay.
In one county that I worked at in Northern California, and
Mm.
um, yeah, they were very that was the only time. That was the only time I
Yeah.
found an issue. And I don't
Yeah.
know what happened after that. I never followed up because I was too busy doing my own work. But yeah,
Right. So how long would it take you usually to like go through like the records of like one establishment?
I could be there anywhere from usually 2 to 4 hours.
2 to 4 hours. Okay.
Yeah, just because it's more the environmental side, but I am looking at all
Right.
the records. But if I was there every single year, it wouldn't take me as long. If I had
Hmm.
like an 18-month span of time, it might take me longer because I'm going through all the records, and I'm also going through, they had to have their stacks tested
Hmm.
for temperature and emissions and all that.
Right.
So I had to look at all those records too, make sure that they were within their permit requirements.
Right.
They have a lot of the requirements. They have to have an odorizer in their stack.
Yes. Yes, that makes
And
sense. You don't want to
yeah,
smell
you don't wanna
barbecue.
smell, no. So they'd used, like a peach odorizer, a peach or an orange or it's an odorizer that they put in the stack, and,
Right.
um, usually there was only one place that I was getting kind of complaints, but it wasn't so much the odor, it just was the smoke. And
Right. Okay.
it was just because the city had built up all the way around it, and there was homes and people were mad, but it was like there was nothing. They were within their permit conditions. I couldn't do anything about it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So kind of a few hours to go through, and that's like one like part essentially, the air quality.
Right.
And did you just check like the stacks and stuff and anything that had to do with like air quality, or did you like look at the other equipment as well?
I did I looked at some of the equipment, but obviously I usually had to go through the embalming room to get to the crematorium.
Mm.
So I was always glancing around to look and see. And sometimes there'd be a few people stacked up. But
Yes.
and I was always trying to be very dignified when I went through there, and so were the staff. They would
Yeah.
apologize, but they would have anyway. I didn't really see these issues. So like when you're talking about nastiness, everything was so clean and orderly and perfect
and that's amazing. It's so like comforting to know that the majority is clean. The majority is respectful and, you know, loving essentially in a way.
I even
That's
inspected, pet crematoriums. I even inspected
Oh,
those.
that's interesting. That's very interesting.
Certain large veterinarian hospitals had pet crematoriums, and they were clean and perfect. And now I don't know about the records because I never looked at I just looked at the stack stuff and made sure everything was above board on there. But as far as the records, I didn't have to look as in depth. I mean, how many kitty cats can you know? But
right,
you know,
right.
it's just, but it was really amazing that they could even take horses. The equipment was so good. Yeah.
Wow,
so
that is very interesting. That's really cool.
It's wild, but I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine how much that is. So
honestly, though, yes, for sure. Well, it's kind of like when, like in hospitals, if they don't have an MRI machine that's like large enough to accommodate like a larger person, then they contact local animal hospitals or you know zoo veterinarians essentially because
I did
they
not know that.
have Grey's Anatomy.
Grey's Anatomy, awesome.
That's where I learned it initially.
I mean, if you've been in an MRI machine, they are little tiny tubes. And your arms are like this. I mean, I have big shoulders, so my arms are like this. But if you're a big person, like a really big guy, you're not going to fit in one.
Yeah, exactly. So they have to make accommodations somehow, you know, because they have to make those diagnostics.
Wow. Okay.
But it's interesting to me that like, so you had this very, very specific part of the crematoriums that you were responsible for making sure we're in good order, all the paperwork was correct. And when the Thomas Shepard and Sons funeral home was audited, initially the on-site audit was 3 days. It took him 3 days to go through everything. And I'm sure he took a lot of like the records, any paperwork that they had, and took it and reviewed it outside of the establishment, but it took him 3 days just to go through the establishment.
Well, and I wonder too, so in Sacramento County, this county that I worked in at the time, we were very specialized. You had air quality, you had water quality, you had different agencies that did different parts. But I wonder if in a state like this is North Carolina, is that right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if they have more of like we have here in Idaho, that Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. So they probably do more than a specialized agency that has a slice of the pie. They probably do a bigger. So it would take you longer.
It's more of like an ethics committee, like how the nursing board, like, or, you know, any sort of physician board has like an ethics committee. I can see it being more along those lines because I'm sure the people that are making any complaints against any of these establishments, whether they're pristine or not, they're grieving, they're going through something. So they have to make sure that they're being, for lack of a better word, like sensitive, you know, making sure everything is covered correctly.
Well, and yeah, as an inspector, if I got a complaint, if I was handling a complaint, I looked harder. I looked harder at the industry that I was going to inspect. And even if you didn't get a complaint, when you walk in the door and you start seeing one violation, you start looking really hard because if there's one, there's more usually. It's a pattern. And that could be why they took so long because they had complaints and they walk in the door and see one issue, then they start looking really hard and they get really nitpicky.
Yes, especially, when you see multiple issues, when it's not just one complaint, but multiple people are saying, hey, this is wrong, then yes, that would absolutely make someone want to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. That absolutely makes sense.
I have a story about a rendering plant someday for another episode.
Oh, that sounds interesting. Like tallow, like, well, ooh, sounds like story time. So essentially this audit, this investigation, it was 3 days long within the facility. He said So the investigator said that during his like 3 days in the establishment, he did not see the owner, Thomas Shepard, one time. And he
Wow.
was there basically all day long, open to close, and then some. And Mr. Shepard was the only licensed funeral director. And they were operating completely as normal without the licensed person
Oh.
in the building at all.
I was going to ask you if he was the only licensed. You answered the question. That's another thing that you'd look for. You
Yep.
betcha.
Yep. He was the
You
only
betcha.
licensed funeral
Oh,
director.
wow.
I mean,
Okay.
his wife was licensed, but just for like the cremation services. That's all she was licensed for. She was not a funeral director.
Okay. Wow.
I
Ooh.
know.
And you know he had to know that he was there because
Yes.
everybody's probably on the phone going, "Hey, the inspector's here. Hey, the inspector's here."
Right. And then the fact that he couldn't even bother to show up when the inspector was there just means
Yeah.
that these people that were hired, you know, you can only do so much as like an employee, like with
Mhm.
complete ignorance, you know. They probably had like a 30-day training period where they learned kind of how to take care of stuff and then were thrown in because this person was just so neglectful. They didn't want to be there, you know. It was a
That doesn't make
responsibility
it
that they
go
didn't want.
away. That doesn't
No,
make it go away at
absolutely
all. And
not.
what it does is fires up your inspector really,
Oh yeah.
really hard. And so
Yes.
all of these agencies have internal attorneys that work for them.
Mhm.
Okay. And so then they go back to the office with their list of violations that long. You can't see my hands that long, and the virtual screen. And you go back to your attorney. We had one where I worked, right? And you say, "Oh my God, I
Mm.
look at all of these violations," and then it's hammer time. Yeah.
Yep.
So
Oh yeah, I can see they probably, I mean, there's more than one inspector, there's more than one employee, you know, working for this body. I'm sure they sent their meanest one, their most thorough.
uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
hope they did, anyways. Um, so another just complaint that they got was from a woman named Christina Webb. So she reported February of that same year of 2020. Let's see. Or no, she said this year. Yeah, so 2020. So that her mother had purchased an inflation proof. This we kind of talked about before. Pre-need contract. So that's where it was prepaid and adjusted already for inflation. And then Melody Shepard. So that was the wife, the cremation specialist person, the wife. She overcharged the family, and then also completely neglected to use like the inflation proof formula, completely ignored the paperwork, charged them what they charged them, and the family ended up having to pay additional money to them out of their own pocket.
Mhm.
I know. There was also services that had been paid for, and the family never received a death certificate. Death certificates were not filed on time. Um, it was kind of like 50-50. Some people would receive their death certificates, usually, I'm sure, after some complaint from loved ones. And then others just didn't get it, had to go to the city themselves and hope that everything was turned in the way it was supposed to.
Yeah, you have to okay, so it depends on the funeral home that handled my dad's cremation and the
Yeah.
one for my mom. They give you like 10 copies of death certificates and they file it with the state.
Yeah.
And they actually also filed it with the Social Security Administration immediately so that
Right.
their benefits can't be stolen because then
Right.
you're on the hook to pay it back as the family. So they file it like immediately. Yeah.
Yes. And that makes absolute sense.
Yeah.
So, but it's just I feel like so Thomas, like his grandfather was the one that started this business, you know, over 100 years ago, and then his father died at like around the age of 53 after he had taken over like the grandfather's business, and so he seems to me like lazy. He didn't want any part of this, but it was probably expected of him, or he felt like it was. And then instead of doing anything else, just decided to do it in the most lazy way possible, the most neglectful way possible.
Yeah.
And it's really disappointing.
Yeah.
It's those little aspects of humanity where you're like, ick.
Yeah, ick.
Yes. So another complaint they had gotten. So it was May of 2020. So Claxton Bailey told regulators after meeting with an unlicensed representative, which pretty much all of them were, of Shepherd Funeral Home, he paid $3,584 in cash toward pre-need services for his mother. So this was before his mother had passed away. The funeral home did not complete a pre-need contract, nor file one with the board as required by law. So anytime a pre-need contract is printed, signed, I'm sure notarized, it has to get filed with the state as well. And then they also did not deposit the money into a trust. So there's supposed to also be a trust set aside, which makes sense. A lot of the times trusts are set up, they're for financial and postmortem ties services. But as this didn't happen, the funeral home was unable to provide any records because they didn't do anything. And after this person's mother died on April 23rd of 2020, Bailey ended up paying out of pocket for his mother's funeral services. So basically, the money that was paid completely beforehand disappeared, and he had to pay all over again because there was no contract, there was no record whatsoever.
Yeah, you get a contract. You do get records. So guys, if you're prepaying for something like this, or your family member is, you get a contract from the funeral home. So, and it's supposed to attach it to the will. I mean, have your ducks in a row, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Interestingly enough, later, so he had gone to a different funeral home, and I'm sure made complaints to them, and I'm sure they reported it. I'm sure he reported it as well. The Shepherd Crematory, issued a refund 3 months after they were supposed to have taken care of her funeral services.
Oh boy.
So in that, I know, 3 months later, that is admitting fault. That's admitting oh yeah, we messed up, but had no record of it.
Yeah. I mean, at least they did issue some refund, but.
Yes, for sure. But it's just neglectful. And I think they did it more of we're about to get in trouble instead of we messed up and we need to do the right thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So the board, as they were kind of reviewing this case, there were 27 alleged violations of North Carolina law, or the rules and regulations, that pertain to the funeral homes or funeral services, that were basically they were in violation for. And they were fined initially. So they were fined up to $5,000 for their violations. And it doesn't specify, I couldn't find whether they were fined per violation or whether it was a lump sum. I hope it was per violation, because that probably wasn't, which is insane to me, because there are when it comes to MSHA, mining, the violations are a ridiculous amount, tens of thousands of dollars sometimes.
Yeah, but the regulations for you're supposed to fine them. I mean, each NOV in each category of NOV, which is notice of violation, has a fine, a dollar amount to it. And the point isn't usually to put them out of business. It's to kind of snap them to attention. But I'm willing to bet it was a lump sum.
That is wild. That is wild. After everything they did, with $200,000 missing,
that becomes an IRS issue, right? So then IRS so IRS usually has bigger teeth than just about anybody else. So, but so they went to court, right? Did they end up going to court?
So As far as I know, they did not go to court. It was completely board handled. So it was just their licensure board, their regulatory board. No criminal charges were filed.
Okay. So then, wow, that's interesting. Are they
It
still in
is.
operation?
Absolutely not. No. But what is crazy to me when I was learning about this is the board revoked their licensure and they were not allowed to reapply for 5 years. So next year they can reapply to get their licenses back. Both of them can. Isn't that
Yeah.
insane?
Yeah, it is. It really is. But okay, I guess the money thing is one thing. They weren't doing anything like one of the funeral homes we just did where they were giving cement instead of ashes or
Right.
moving bodies or had jars of babies in the
Yes,
basement.
it's
I mean,
definitely not as graphic.
this was bad, but it
Yes,
wasn't the worst. So
it's
I can
true.
understand them saying, okay, you've been basically essentially shut down for 5 years. If you've learned your lesson, I hope
Yeah.
that the licensing board would pay very close attention to them if they decided to go into business again.
Right. And you'd hope like in the past 5 years that they have been out of business, that they have moved on to something else. They've chosen to do anything else,
Anything else?
anything else, because they were not meant for this. They were not
Yeah,
suited for this. They
right,
absolutely should have. He should have sold it when his father passed away. If he should have acknowledged that he was not capable
right,
of having empathy and having respect for other human beings, and
right,
sold it, given
right.
it to someone else. Whatever, he just moved on.
Yeah.
But
So
not everyone's right.
okay, they were closed down, and then yeah,
Mhm.
the people who paid for stuff, and now the money's gone. I mean, they're the
Right,
ones that are
right.
they're hurting through all of this because now they got to pay for it again. Yeah.
Exactly.
Ah,
And a lot of the times, they so during like their initial period, so there is like a period after like their licensure is revoked, they have like, I think it was like 30 or 60 days where they could basically organize like the current like deceased that was in their care, like their burial or their cremation. And mostly they were like sent to other crematories, sent to other funeral homes. Uh, so that's good. They kind of, that was taken care of, and it doesn't specify whether it happened like in a timely manner, in a respectful manner. I wouldn't assume so, just based off of like how similar things were handled by Melody, the wife, prior, with ripping up the death certificate, just because people wanted to change funeral homes. They weren't
right.
feeling like their mother was respected. And so
Hmm.
you can't imagine that they had taken the high road.
Right. That was so sad.
Uh, it is so sad. It's so sad. People, I think honesty, honesty is important.
Hmm.
Honesty with yourself, honesty with others. And not everyone has that like philosophy. Um, but
Yeah.
I think also the hardest thing is being honest with yourself, learning to be honest with yourself. And that's something they completely lacked. And I did find because you can find like Yelp reviews like
Oh,
of this
no.
establishment still, even though like they haven't been in practice in 4 years. There is a website, it's funeralhomes.com, and they list like every single funeral home like in the US.
Okay.
And they take like bios from the websites. They have like the website listed, but they take the bio from the website and they put it on their page. And I did save like a snippet of their bio.
Okay.
4 years later, they're completely shut down. Thank goodness. Like the website does not exist. It's 404. It's gone. Um, but this was what their bio was on their website. It was Thomas Shepard and Sons Funeral in Hendersonville, North Carolina, offers compassionate and professional funeral services for families in the area. Our experienced staff is available 24/7 to provide support and guidance during difficult times. We offer a range of services, including funeral services, memorial services, and burial services to honor your loved one's memory. And then it states their address. And it says, our funeral home is here to help you navigate the funeral planning process with care and expertise. Contact us at number for more information on how we can assist you in honoring your loved one's life.
Oh, they sound so professional.
They sound so professional.
Oh my God.
And it's just bull. It's crap.
God.
It's insane to me. That is deceit at its finest.
Yeah, it sure is, isn't it? Wow.
Yeah. I
Well,
found that and I was shocked.
yeah, well, it's like used car salesman, right?
Right.
Sorry if you
For
you're
sure.
a used car salesman, but man, you guys are really good at making a turd look like a diamond.
Yeah, coating it in glitter, rolling it
Oh
around.
my
Yep.
God. That new car
Oh, it's
smell. Smell
shiny.
it? Yeah.
Yeah, don't look under the hood though.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh, that's insane. Well, thanks for the show. Yeah. Be careful, guys. Do some due diligence. Look at Better Business Bureau ratings. Talk to people in your community. There's got to be ways that things can be found out before
sure.
it gets bad. So, yeah.
For sure.
Anyway,
Like especially if you live in a small community, you can totally find that stuff out.
Yeah, like yeah. Well, we didn't hear. The first case was here in this town, and it's pretty small community. I mean, it's not
That's true
anymore, but it's a fairly small community, and people were making complaints and going, what's going on? Where's my daughter? Where's my son? Where's my mother? And
yes.
Nothing was happening. And they had gotten
Yeah.
fined and fined and fined and fined. And then it blew up. So
yes, that episode shocked me to hear what they were doing.
Yeah.
Because people that I've known from Idaho are so kind and so welcoming and just good people. It's so shocking to associate such a close-knit community with something so horrendous.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little nutty. So
it really is. It really is.
Thanks, McKenna. And we will catch you next time with another funeral show. We have more to come. So, woohoo. All right, guys. See you later.
Bye.